This is the BioCentury Show.
The BioCentury Show is brought to you by Pharon Pharmaceuticals. Pharon is developing a novel immunotherapy that could reshape treatment for high-risk myelodysplastic syndromes, especially in patients who have relapsed after standard therapies. Pharon's lead candidate, bexmarilimab, is a first-in-class anti-CLEVER-1 antibody that reprograms immune-suppressive macrophages and reignites the immune system, making tumors more responsive to treatment. Phase 2 data from the BEXMAB study shows that bexmarilimab can overcome treatment resistance to standard of care aciditine in relapsed refractory high-risk myelodysplastic syndromes. This approach could unlock new possibilities for patients and doctors alike.
Welcome to the BioCentury Show. I'm Stephen Hansen, Director of Biopharma Intelligence at BioCentury, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Adam Steensberg, President and CEO of Danish biotech Zealand Pharma. Prior to taking on the CEO role, Adam had been Zealand's CMO and head of R&D, where he led the company's R&D strategy. Before that, he was at crosstown rival Novo Nordisk and had worked as a clinician at the University of Copenhagen, where he earned his MD degree. Adam also has an MBA from IMD in Switzerland. His company, Zealand Pharma, which is based just outside of Copenhagen, is a leading biotech in the cardiometabolic space with 3 clinical programs, including the dual glucagon GLP-1 agonist survodutide, which is partnered with Boehringer Ingelheim and in phase 3 testing for MASH, as well as one of the most advanced Amylin programs in petrelintide, which earlier this year was the focus of biotech's largest ever upfront licensing agreement, in which Roche will pay $1.65 billion to develop and co-commercialize the molecule. Adam, welcome to the BioCentury Show.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Wonderful to have you. So, while I know it's not your most advanced program, given the interest that there is in obesity and amylin specifically, coupled with the big splash that your team made earlier this year with the Roche deal, I think the only place that we can start is with petrelintide. So, I would argue that amylin is now one of, if not the hottest target in the obesity space. Can you go into some detail as to what makes it so attractive relative to GLP-1 based therapies that most people are familiar with?
Yeah, so I think we are extremely excited about the potential of petrelintide and also more broadly amylin as a class to actually offer the first true alternative to the GLP-1 based therapies for weight loss. And I think it's extremely important to recognize and realize that even though GLP-1s are very effective molecules in helping people lose weight, a lot of patients, they struggle to stay on these therapies due to side effects, GI side effects, and also just the way they work, where they make people lose their appetite, which can be an annoying thing, especially once you have achieved your weight loss and you get into weight maintenance. And we think with amylin, and in particular with petrelintide, with what we have seen thus far, we can actually deliver the weight loss that the majority of obese individuals are looking for in a more pleasant way. And thereby we can also help more patients not only lose their weight, but also maintain that weight loss, which is absolutely critical if we are to achieve the long-term health outcomes and health benefits that we are all aiming for with these medicines.
Yeah, so you mentioned sort of the possible areas that amylin could be used. Can you paint me a picture of what a sort of commercially successful product profile looks like for an amylin monotherapy, and kind of where you think it might best fit in that treatment paradigm?
So we think there are actually multiple ways an amylin can be used. We think that by far the biggest opportunity is to develop a true alternative to the GLP-1s, and that would be a molecule that could deliver on average between 15 to 20% weight loss, because that is the weight loss that most patients are looking for. If you ask them, most patients would be, obese patients would say they would be going for a 10 to 20% weight loss. And if your average is between 15 and 20, you will actually meet the need of most patients. So that would be a true alternative for the patients who are otherwise only have GLP-1 as an offering. The other opportunity, of course, is to combine an amylin together with a GLP-1 And that would be a potential great product for patients who are looking for the highest degree of weight loss. So those could be patients who would otherwise be candidates for bariatric surgery. So aiming for that 30% weight loss or 25 to 30% weight loss. That's where we see a combination of a GLP-1 and amylin could be interesting. And then there are other segments, such as obese individuals living with type 2 diabetes, where we actually know that the GLP-1s are very effective in helping people control their glucose, but significantly less effective when it comes to weight loss in patients with type 2 diabetes. In contrast, amylin actually seems to work extremely well also from a weight loss perspective in patients with type 2 diabetes. So by combining the GLP-1 and an amylin, we could really see an opportunity to address also significant weight loss in obese individuals living with type 2 diabetes. So the ambition we have with petrelintide is to develop this as a novel foundational therapy for weight management. If it has this profile of having significantly less side effects, and also we believe a more pleasant experience in how it helps people take in less calories, we think it should be the first choice treatment, and then you can start to combine it with the GLP-1s if you need more.
You mentioned that pleasant experience. Can we expand a little more on that? Because I think that was quite an interesting thing that had come out that I guess I hadn't fully appreciated when I was first thinking about these different mechanisms. Can you talk a little bit more about that sort of that hedonistic experience or lack thereof with that you can get with some of the incretin therapies?
There's no question. The most effective way to lose weight is by taking in less calories. And that, you can say, is something that both the GLP-1s and the amylins are helping people with. The way the GLP-1s mostly work is by decreasing people's appetite. So you basically turn up at the buffet and you're not hungry. Some people will even feel, could you please get me out of this room with food, because I really don't feel well when I have all this food in front of me. Amylin, in contrast, works on satiety. So that is by helping people feel full faster. So you will actually turn up at the meal, you will engage, you'll be happy, but you will eat a smaller portion. And that we believe will be a more pleasant way to reduce your food intake and your calorie intake than always turning up, not being hungry. And it does so by actually activating the leptin pathway. So leptin is a hormone that is released from fat tissue and signals to the brain to inform people to stop eating once they have taken in enough calories. But many obese individuals are resistant to that signal, and amylin have been shown to make people sensitive to leptin again. So we think it's a more natural way for the body to actually reduce food intake and calorie intake than how the GLP-1s are working.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was one of the first things that struck me, I guess, was the idea that you might be disgusted by your favorite food was not the most appealing idea. So I can understand how the idea of just having smaller portions is really more attractive.
And I think it's really a critical measure here, because what we are probably looking at right now also with the GLP-1s is we have seen a lot of obese individuals who have tried a GLP-1, and these molecules has also helped people lose weight. But once they have achieved their weight loss and you get over the initial excitement of losing weight, then some of these side effects and the whole way a GLP-1 works may actually cause a lot of patients to say, well, it's too difficult for me to stay on these therapies. And that's where we think we need to start to think about treatment of obesity as a chronic disease and not just a weight loss Olympics. It's about how do you actually help patients lose weight, but more importantly, maintain that weight. And that requires more pleasant therapies.
So you'd mentioned earlier about, this potentially being foundational. And so I wanted to focus on that. I mean, are you suggesting that amylin agonists could potentially supplant GLP-1s in terms of being a backbone for standard of care therapy in obesity?
That is definitely our ambition with petrelintide. We also do recognize at launch, of course, the GLP-1s will have had so much clinical experience and so many clinical data that if you can tolerate a GLP-1, you should, of course, start on that on a GLP-1 before you get exposed to second generation molecules. So over time, once we have established data to also demonstrate the long-term health outcomes with amylins, and here we are very confident in what we have seen thus far, that amylin is also reducing all the risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Once we have established those clinical measures as well, we think it is realistic to consider amylin to be the first-line therapy, because as we discussed before, it is actually not just about helping people lose weight. It's much more important to help people maintain that weight loss. And if people cannot stay on the GLP-1s, it's a huge problem, because then we will see the majority of patients actually regaining the weight. And we have known for many, many years that yo-yo in weight up and down is actually very unhealthy for organs. So once we have established the durability of this concept over the GLP-1 class, we think it has a very fair shot of becoming actually first line.
Right. So one of the benefits that we have seen with the GLP-1 therapies is obviously not just the weight loss itself, but the impact it has on other comorbidities that are often come with obesity. Do amylin agonists carry that same potential to address comorbidity indications as well?
That is definitely our belief. And when we look at the risk markers such as blood pressure, heart rate, lipids, cholesterol, CRPs, or a marker of inflammation, we see that they are reduced to the same extent with an amylin analog as they are with the GLP-1 class. So we would definitely expect that translate into clinical benefit to a number of these organs that we have also seen that the GLP-1s provide benefit for. And it is very significant and to the core of why Zealand is actually developing medicines for obesity. That is, of course, to address the comorbidities associated with obesity, because this obesity pandemic, where we will soon have around 50% of the population being overweight and obese, is driving so many comorbidities. Up to 220 diseases can be ascribed associated with the obesity pandemic, and we simply have to do something about that. And that is our true belief, that we can also ultimately prove that with the amylins, but we need, of course, the clinical data, and that will be focusing on generating in the coming years.
So when you say about sort of the generating that clinical data, one of the other potential benefits, at least we've seen early evidence for amylin agonists, is on lean mass preservation, or some people call muscle sparing sort of attribute. Now, obviously, amylin isn't the only mechanism that's aiming to improve not just the quantity of weight loss that patients experience, but also the quality of weight loss, by driving the majority of weight loss from fat mass rather than from lean or muscle mass. Now, there's a bit of a controversy around this coming out of data that was presented this weekend at ADA, but I wondered if we could just talk a little bit about the current technologies that are used to measure this and whether those are deemed to be sufficient really to be able to track this accurately, or do we need to move on to some other more accurate methodologies to track this?
Yeah, so there's no question. Of course, if you are aiming for a weight loss, you would prefer it to be mostly fat and less muscle. But it's also a fact that most weight loss regimes are associated with some degree of muscle loss because you carry less weight. So unless you start to significantly exercise more, it's a natural thing that you will lose a little bit of muscle. Then we have seen, perhaps with some of the more aggressive approaches with the GLP-1s, we have seen reports that maybe we'll see extensive muscle wasting with the most, if you go for the fastest weight loss in the GLP-1. So of course, there's a higher degree of interest in looking in for modalities that could reduce the muscle wasting and more have a preferential fat loss when you lose weight. And you're right, in preclinical studies in different species, these are very robust findings for the amylin class, that the amylins actually preserve muscles to a larger extent than the GLP-1s. We still need to see evidence in humans, and we did see an early, very small data set here coming out of American Diabetes Association, which didn't really capture any differences. What Zealand is doing in our large phase 2B study is applying a quite different technology, MRI, which has a more sensitive method to actually look into lean body mass and also fat distributed into different regions and so on. So I would put it this way, that it's still an unanswered question in my mind in humans, but we need further data, and it probably have to be using more precise mechanisms to address this. Ultimately, if we talk about muscle preservation, of course, it also have to be functional muscle. And remember, a lot of these imaging modalities actually measure fluid or water content in different tissues. So to have the ultimate proof, we need a functional measure to also show that there's actually some benefit of that muscle, or perhaps even a metabolic chamber where you can demonstrate that there could be a higher resting energy expenditure. I think ultimately that is probably the biggest contributor. If you could maintain a little bit more muscle and thereby also maintain your resting energy metabolism a little bit higher, that can really help in the weight maintenance phase, because you can take in a little bit more calories and still maintain your weight. So it's early days here. We need to apply different methodologies to assess not only the mass, but also the function of the muscles. And then ultimately, I think the biggest benefit will be in the weight maintenance setting if we achieve muscle preservation.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, thank you, Adam. We'll take a short break here and we will be right back.
Grand Rounds, BioCentury's R&D conference, will make its European debut in 2025. Join us to debate key translational bottlenecks and unlock scientific breakthroughs with commercial potential. Connect with VCs, academic innovators, and biopharma R&D and BD leaders to explore cutting-edge advancements in early-stage R&D as we dive into disease biology, therapeutic modalities, and enabling technologies. Join us for the inaugural BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe in Cambridge, UK, the September 17th to 19th. Register and learn more at biocenturygrandroundseurope.com.
Welcome back to the BioCentury Show. We are in conversation with Adam Steensberg, President and CEO of Zealand Pharma. Now, Adam, in early March, Zealand announced a licensing deal with Roche for petrelintide that included a cash payment of $1.65 billion, with $1.4 billion of that upfront. It also included $1.2 billion in development milestones, $2.4 billion in sales milestones. But in my mind, the big kicker was the co-commercialization rights that came with the deal, which will see you and Roche equally sharing profits and losses in the US and Europe for both monotherapy sales as well as combinations with other Roche obesity programs. It's the biggest upfront in BioCentury's BCIQ deals database, which dates back to 2009. So can you take us behind the curtain a little bit on the BD process here? How many interested parties were there? What were the priorities that you had for a potential partner, and how did you arrive at the valuation?
We're extremely pleased with this deal, and of course, having Roche as a partner, it's really the ideal setup for us, and also the ideal partner. So we got the significant data, 16-week data in June last year, and after that decided to start a structured process to reach out to most of the large pharma companies to understand really what their ambition were in this space, because we do see obesity as the biggest unmet medical need of our times and one of the biggest healthcare challenges. And we would expect more large pharma companies to be in this space outside just Lilly and Novo. And so we reached out, and there were, of course, a number of companies who were interested to have conversations. And I would say what really drew up the competitiveness of this process was that it's easy for most large pharma companies to understand that it's actually more relevant to try and lead in a novel category than trying to tap into a very established category, as we are seeing with the GLP-1s. So I think it was very appealing to a lot of these pharma companies who don't really have a strong presence in obesity yet, to actually lead with what could become and what looks to be the best-in-class amylin that we have out there. So it was a very competitive process. For us, it was extremely important to find a partner who have actually a true ambition of leading in this space, because it does require a lot of investments. It's not just about a deal announcement and an upfront. It's investments into organization and, very importantly, into manufacturing capacity. And that with Roche and with the interactions we had with Roche, that team, and with Thomas, they really convinced us that they are here in the long term. They really want to be a leader in this space. They recognize the need to treat obesity, and also with the manufacturing plans that they communicated to us during the diligence process, and now we have seen some of that, where they announced a huge plant in North Carolina, which will be fit for these products. We really felt that it was the right partner. Of course, it also helped that, as you mentioned, that they decided to also provide us with 50% profit share on the combination products, of which they have this GLP-1 GIP, which we actually think is a very strong GLP-1 GIP molecule. So to have the profit share not only on amylin, but also the combination product adds a lot of value and strategic opportunity for Zealand and us together as we progress these programs. And then ultimately, cultural fit is important when you engage in a true co-development and co-commercialization partnership, because it's not just a licensing agreement. It's actually it's an agreement where we will work alongside each other for a number of years or for the product lifetime. So cultural fit was also very important for us. And all that ended up with us really tick boxing all the parameters that we were looking for.
Wonderful. So I want to broaden out a little bit if we can and talk a bit more largely about obesity, or even more broadly the cardiometabolic space, and just think about it in terms of the treatment paradigm. What do you foresee as kind of being the standard kind of treatment experience for an obesity patient in, say, 5 years' time?
Yeah, so in 5 years, I think the GLP-1s will, of course, still be the major category because they've been around for such a long time. But we will hopefully have seen the launches of the first alternatives being the amylins. Of course, we also expect to see all GLP-1 entering the marketplace. We, as a company, are less excited about those opportunities on behalf of patients, because we actually think that the all GLP-1s will have at least, if not more, of these side effects that make people stop taking the GLP-1s. So we don't really think the all GLP-1s solve this issue of helping patients to stay on therapy for longer. They might be a nice alternative for those who are afraid of a needle, of which we actually believe there are very few. So what will excite me is the launch, of course, of novel therapies that can truly expand and provide new opportunities for that very large group of patients who do not want to be on a GLP-1. The other thing I foresee is that within the GLP-1 class, I do expect that you will see companies who have more differentiated GLP-1s will start to tap into specific subsegments of obesity. So either targeting obese individuals with fatty liver disease or obese individuals with another specific disease to kind of differentiate from the first generation GLP-1s. For instance, there's our product with Boehringer survodutide, which has a glucagon as part of the mix. The GLP-1 glucagon could be a fantastic molecule for obese individuals with fatty liver disease if the data that they generate in phase 3 will continue to deliver what we have seen in phase 2.
I'm glad you mentioned survodutide, which is, as you said, in phase 3 and is a very interesting molecule, and we're obviously looking forward to that data readout. But I wanted to circle back, if you don't mind, about one of your comments on the oral small molecule GLP-1s, just because obviously we're sort of on the cusp of the first one potentially going to be coming to market here in the near term. And I feel like there's a lot of debate between whether these will end up being positioned as a first-line therapy, or if it is something that you would have patients on an injectable and then move them to an oral as maintenance. But it sounds like you're falling more on that first line, but just for a subset of patients that don't like needles. Am I hearing you correctly, that you don't really see a role for an oral therapy there as a maintenance therapy?
I just don't see a patient who are happy on an injectable GLP-1 wanting to try and go to an all GLP-1 based therapy, in particular not with what, of course, it's still early days, but thus far, it looks like there might be more side effects such as diarrhea and other side effects. So why change it if you're one of those few patients who actually are okay with being on the injection that you're on, and you have already been on it for let's say 6 months? Why would you change it? Because it's part of it's a once weekly injection. So I don't see that as a huge opportunity for the orals. Of course, if there will be a segment of patients who don't like to inject themselves once a week. But what we have seen thus far in this category, I think there's been very few barriers to injections, and you've even seen a lot of patients, probably 1/3 of patients in the US are going with vial and syringe, and not even these very convenient auto-injectors. So So I think we are looking into a different category where there's a much bigger acceptance for injections, and definitely for maintenance therapy. I think people would shy away from any GLP-1 that carried more side effects than whatever they were on before.
Right. And now another thing that you sort of touched on about sort of this sort of subdividing sort of these patients, I think that's going to be a really interesting topic going forward in terms of you start to sort of categorize these patients into different settings. Is there a future of obesity treatment that's more personalized, or even, I mean, dare I say, I mean, are we going to start seeing any precision medicine start to play in obesity in the future, do you think?
I actually think there will be a lot of personalized medicine, but here I actually more think about people's lifestyles. How does this treatment fit into the life that a patient wants to live? Because and precision medicine, I do expect will be very far out when it comes to obesity, but personalized medicine, making sure you develop medicines that can help people not only lose weight but also fit into the life they want to have once they have achieved their weight loss. And that's back to, even if you can tolerate a product that gives you, let's say, 25 or 30% weight loss, maybe that is not the life you want to live, because it will require you to really change your eating habits lifelong if you are to maintain such a weight loss. So maybe some patients would still prefer only a 10% weight loss, even if it came at zero side effects, the 30%. So we really have to think about making sure that we have treatment that fits the life of patients so they stay on therapy. It's actually a little bit interesting to think about. In the last 30 years, we have had plenty of programs that can help people lose weight. It just requires a lot of effort with counseling and so on. But it's also a fact, the minute we give up on those things, people regain in weight. And so it's really about how we personalize it so we make sure these treatments help patients maintain their weight loss. I think that's going to be the goal for a very long time. And then talking about precision medicine, it is a very heterogeneous situation with obesity. There's going to be so many, both environmental, genetic, and other reasons. But I would say I think still pretty long out before we start to do a blood sample and then say you have to get on this treatment, because you cannot test in the blood how patients like to eat or have a glass of red wine once in a while.
Very true. Very true. So obviously we spent a lot of time on petrelintide, which is obviously the one that gets the most interest from the investment community. But, you know, we've already mentioned survodutide as your most advanced program. But I did want to touch on one of the earlier stage programs, just partly because, you know, you saw some very intriguing data that was announced last week, phase 1 data for your dual GLP-1, GLP-2 agonist, dapiglutide. I'm going to preface this, you know, so our database shows that there are at least 123 GLP-1s that are in development globally. Nearly 80 of them are in the clinic, and I'm sure there's probably more that we might not be aware of. So why develop another GLP-1? What's the potential differentiation here for dapiglutide?
I think it's a brilliant question, and it's one which everyone should ask themselves, because there's, of course, a limit to how many GLP-1s we need out there, especially because the patient experience are going to be quite similar. So our way of thinking about this is that if you want to develop a molecule that has GLP-1 within it, you really have to think about what does that added pharmacology provide. And with dapiglutide, our GLP-1, GLP-2, we are trying to target even more control of inflammation. So obese individuals, they have low-grade inflammation, and it's believed that a large part of, or some part of that, can be driven by inflammation from the gut. And we think a GLP-2 component can actually reduce that inflammation from the gut, and also GLP-2 in itself have some anti-inflammatory properties. So it's really about trying to give the patients the weight loss they can expect from a GLP-1, but then control inflammation to a larger extent, and thereby hopefully be even better at addressing some of the comorbidities to obesity, because the low-grade inflammation is believed to drive so much of disease associated with obesity. So for us, it's about controlling inflammation to a larger extent. We will likely target this molecule into some specific subsegments of obesity, just as we discussed before with Boehringer really having explored survodutide in MASH beyond weight loss. We will also look to focus in on certain comorbidities where we think inflammation plays an even larger role. But yeah.
Okay. And I would presume, is this also a candidate then for combination therapy as well?
It could be, but of course, you can say with where we are right now, where we also have profit share on the CT388 asset from us, I would say our focus for dapiglutide will be developing that as a mono, if you will, even though it touched two receptors, therapy for a specific indication as initially. Then you can always consider loose combination, but it will not be a fixed dose program initially for the focus at least.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you, Adam. I think that brings us to the end of our time, but thank you very much for joining us here on the BioCentury Show. I really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for the audience for watching, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you.
BioCentury would like to thank Pharon Pharmaceuticals for supporting the BioCentury Show podcast. Pharon believes bexmarilimab's early data suggests that product could offer new hope for high-risk MDS patients with limited treatment options. Learn more at pharon.com.